It is now my pleasure to welcome HTTP Board Chair Brent Wilkes. I've had the opportunity to work with Brent in various capacities over the years, and I am so excited to get another opportunity to collaborate again here at HTTP. Thank you for joining us, Brent.
Thanks, JudeAnne, and thank you all for joining us for HTTP's Digital Inclusion Summit. With the uncertainty that we all experienced the past few years, we are back to being virtual, but we look forward to hosting you all in person next year for a live event. 2022 has already been a year of tremendous growth and renewal for HTTP, and this is something that's no exception for many of you. Alejandro, who many of us know, and who started the Digital Inclusion Summit for HTTP, has left us to join the Federal Communications Commission. We're so proud of him for really making a huge difference over at the Federal Communications Commission. But that has opened the door for the expansion of our HTTP team. And so this year, we are happy to welcome JudeAnne Heath as HTTP's National Programs Director, Dario Pantosin, who will lead our communication strategy. And we've also brought on Chris Rodriguez as our first National Policy Fellow. You will hear more from Chris and JudeAnne throughout the program today. You know, I'd also like to take a moment to thank this year's underwriting partners, Comcast, NBC Universal Telemundo, Verizon, AT&T, Google, T-Mobile, Charter, and Meta. Thank you all so much for your incredible support of HTTP. And thank you for your ongoing partnership and support of this year's program. In addition to chairing HTTP, I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Vice President for Institutional Development for Hispanic Federation. And Hispanic Federation is also investing heavily in promoting Latino digital inclusion. For example, our Latino Digital Accelerator program helps build the digital skills training capacity of Latino-led and Latino-serving nonprofits engaged in workforce development. And through them, we're helping to increase Latino community access to digital skills training. The initiative combines organizational capacity building, support for digital career centers, housed in more than 40 partner nonprofits, and a long-term online Latino Digital Center of Excellence to share knowledge and resources through research, curriculum development, and access, and disseminations of lessons learned. Over 12,000 individuals have been trained through the Latino Digital Accelerator Network in just its first year of operation, and many of those individuals have been able to get new job opportunities, and in some cases have even tripled their salaries. So we know this works. You know, it's now my great pleasure to be able to introduce Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, whose historic election came after a lifetime of public service, having been elected the District Attorney of San Francisco, the California Attorney General, and United States Senator. With her help, the bipartisan infrastructure package recently passed and has brought the largest investment in history to work toward bridging the digital divide, something that's at the very core of what HTTP does. At the heart of the White House strategy, led by the Vice President, is ensuring the access of high-speed internet to everyone and everywhere. The White House has been doing an amazing job with the Vice President's help of conducting virtual listening sessions on the digital divide and getting the community's input on how to address this important topic. The administration is also focused on creating a high-speed rural internet initiative as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that the Vice President helped negotiate and get passed. The whole government approach to connecting everyone everywhere is really making a huge difference. And the Vice President has been front and center of making this opportunity a reality. So please help me welcome the Vice President of the United States.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to join you today. In the 21st century, high-speed internet is a necessity. Students use it to access digital textbooks. Parents use the internet to get their weekly shopping done, and entrepreneurs use the internet to start and grow small businesses. People everywhere use the internet to read the news, to check the weather, to plan their trips, and so much more. And for so many of us, the internet is essential to taking care of the stuff we need to handle every day. Yet, today, more than 42 million people in our country do not have access to high-speed internet at home. Some because they cannot afford the cost of a monthly plan, and others because high-speed internet is just not available in the place where they live. And we know that for certain communities, They are much less likely to be connected to the internet than others for both those reasons, accessibility and affordability. In fact, less than 65% of Hispanic adults have high-speed internet access at home. And this has real consequences. When people are cut off from high-speed internet, they are cut off from opportunity. The opportunity to pursue an education or to receive health care and to build a business. And that is why our administration is working to ensure that every person in our nation, no matter where they live or how much they earn, can access and afford high-speed internet. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, our administration invested $65 billion to expand and modernize our broadband infrastructure and to lower the cost of high-speed internet. HTTP is essential to the success of all of that work. Every day, you, as leaders, are building bridges across the digital divide. You are helping connect the people of our nation with the technology and the opportunities they need to succeed and to thrive. I thank you all and each of you for your leadership and for your partnership. Take care.
Thank you again, Vice President Harris, for your leadership and for taking the time to be with us today. As mentioned this year, this moment is our opportunity to achieve a digital breakthrough for everyone. For those of you unfamiliar with the work of HTTP, we are a CEO roundtable of national Latino civil rights organizations taking collective action to promote access, adoption, and the full utilization of technology and telecommunications resources by the Latinx community across the United States. Through our community education, advocacy, and by serving as a collective national voice for underserved communities in the tech and telecommunications policy arena, we hope to achieve a fair, just, and equitable digital economy together, one where every person can connect, create, and thrive. The dual health and economic crisis that all of us are currently still surviving underscored that the digital divide is not just a divide, but for Latinx, Black, Indigenous, Asian folks, and other communities of color, it is more like a cliff that separates us into digital haves and digital have-nots. There is good news. With the help of President Biden and Vice President Harris and the bipartisan infrastructure package, we do have the tools to help ensure that every person, regardless of where they live or their economic standing, can have access to affordable, reliable broadband internet. This, paired with increased access to digital devices and digital skills training, helps give communities a better foundation to make full use of the resources available online for education, work, telehealth, and more. Most importantly, we are having the necessary conversations about digital equity and what it will take to actually achieve our shared goal of universal access and adoption. I'm so excited to start today's panel with 4 dynamic women leading at the local and national level to help us define these building blocks of digital equity. This conversation is presented in partnership with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance and is led by NDIA's Executive Director, Angela Siefer. Angela, thank you and take it away.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Angela Siefer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I'm here in Columbus, Ohio, in my home office, and that's my dog sleeping. I don't know. Can you see her? She's adorable. It's great to be here. We're thrilled to be doing this panel. I'm thrilled to have 3 of my favorite people, 3 female rock stars in the digital inclusion space, talking about what it is that they are doing in their communities in very collaborative ways, all of them, which is super awesome. And they're all from different fields, which is even more perfect. So real quick, NDIA, we've been around about 7 years. It's National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Our website is digitalinclusion.org. We got started because there wasn't an entity on the ground representing local digital inclusion programs like what you're going to hear from these lovely ladies. So our job is to elevate what they're doing, learn from them and all the others who are doing work like them, and then take that and help folks who are doing similar work talk to each other, learn from each other, but then also take it to policymakers so they understand what that expertise is locally. So let's get started. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, just a tiny bit about their work, and then we're just going to have a lively, fun conversation. Jordan, would you like to go first?
Happy to. Thanks, Angela, for having me. My name is Jordan Davis. I'm also in Columbus, Ohio. I am the executive director of an organization called Smart Columbus, which is the community's innovation office. And we chair the Digital Equity Coalition here in Franklin County. And we're a collaborative coalition of over 30 different nonprofit organizations, looking at everything from expanding broadband access to device access, skills, and outreach overall. Excited to be with you today.
And Carrie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Angela. And I'm Carrie Coogan, and I'm the Deputy Director for Community Engagement and Public Affairs at the Kansas City Public Library in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm also part of the steering council of the Kansas City Coalition for Digital Inclusion. I've been doing this work for 8-10 years or more now. I'm really excited about it. We were lucky enough to host one of the very first National Digital Inclusion Alliance conferences in Kansas City, Missouri, way back when. But really just so thrilled to be here and share information and ideas, because now with the pandemic and everything that it's revealed about the digital divide, it's just such an important time for us to share and collaborate and find ways to make sure that everybody can be connected, as quickly, as efficiently, as equitably, and, and do this in the most fair and transparent way that we can. So really happy to be here and excited to meet with this incredible group of people.
Thank you, Carrie. Candelaria.
Hi. Candelaria Mendoza. I am the Interim Digital Inclusion Administrator at the City of San Antonio. And I've been working with digital inclusion, helping kind of lead the conversations, socializing digital divide for last few years, definitely in collaboration with all the amazing entities that are already doing digital inclusion work and advocacy in San Antonio. So I definitely see my role as that, a kind of a connector piece, trying to get an idea about the big picture so that we can really focus on any gaps, and really leveraging this kind of once in a lifetime opportunity with this infrastructure bill to do as much as we possibly can to move the needle on the digital divide, and then obviously advocate for pieces that may be missing. So I'm excited to share that information with y'all, a little bit of our lessons learned. Hopefully we can kind of connect and get to what Carrie mentioned, which is those best practices, so we can all be a little bit more effective in this space.
Super, thank you. So digital inclusion is the activities that get us to digital equity. One of the first things NDIA did was develop these definitions, and digital equity is for everyone, individuals, communities having full access and use of information communication technologies. Digital inclusion being the how. So digital inclusion, those how is what everyone here works on every day. That is the access to the network itself that's affordable, the devices that meet somebody's needs, the digital literacy training, the tech support. In that how, what we've seen really just blossom during the pandemic is this need for collaboration and the development of coalitions. So all three of our panelists today run in some way, either in a big way or a smaller way, are involved with coalitions and collaborative work in their communities. So let's get into the differences between the work of a coalition versus the work of your organizations, because your organizations themselves do digital inclusion work. That's not the same as the coalition doing this work. I know Jordan and I, since we're in the same town, have actually had to have beverages over this exact topic. So I'm going to ask Jordan to get started and how she and some of her collaborators in Columbus see this issue.
Yeah, it's one of our biggest tensions is the dynamic between coordination and communication and implementation, and where is the line, and when do you kind of give the responsibility to the local organizations to really run with and make sure that the coalition doesn't overstep its role, creating priorities or unintended competition with organizations within the own group. So my other hat is executive director of Smart Columbus. We are an innovation collaborative, and we're doing a lot of implementation work in facilitating pilots and proofs of concept. We're doing research and really kind of laying the groundwork of discovery for new projects and interventions that will help close these divides. The difference of the DEC really is in helping to identify those, and I think bring a level of coordination and transparency to what all is going on. So if we can get it all on the table, that helps others figure out where there's space to add a solution, or there's space to grow an existing solution, or, hey, we need to coordinate and cross kind of pollinate this opportunity. I think it's a work in progress. I don't think it's an art more than a science. But it takes a lot of really a willingness to have some really difficult conversations to make sure we're all playing the right roles in the ecosystem.
Candelaria, can you describe what's happening in San Antonio, the role of the city versus the role of the coalition versus the role of the new organization that's been created?
Yeah, and so in San Antonio, I think through the efforts of the last few years of kind of socializing the digital divide, getting organizations more involved. We have a Digital Inclusion Alliance of San Antonio that was kind of the informal volunteer group that just kind of stepped up and, through all of their hard work of getting to our city council, getting to our county commissioners, created kind of that relationship building of describing what the digital divide was and why we should all care about it. And then, of course, with the pandemic, it just kind of created this re-emphasis on its importance, and everybody got hit. So if you hadn't had your aha moment about the digital divide, you definitely had it during the pandemic. So it hit workforce, education, telehealth, all of these backup plans that had been built to tell our community members, well, go to your public library, go to your community center, go to this place. All of those places shut down. There wasn't anywhere that people could send to do digital inclusion support, or just even accessing the internet. So it was really kind of that momentum that helped build an effort to do a strategic plan. So with the city of San Antonio, we had already been coordinating with our county, and we had implemented a digital inclusion survey and assessment. And again, with the city, we wanted to create kind of core functions that then we could all kind of feed from. So we had this baseline data set of where the digital divide was in our community. It was self-reported data, something that we can use to kind of articulate and use to kind of argue the data that is being kind of fed through the FCC and other places about who really is in this digital divide, how many people do we actually have disconnected. So that kind of helped us form an entity, which is now SA Digital Connects, that is taking on kind of an advocacy piece. So that is a public-private public coalition. It's an unincorporated non-for-profit, but its intent isn't to take money and implement strategies or projects. Its intent is solely to help us all kind of be on the same page, sharing data sets, sharing information, sharing alignment, sharing aspirational goals to what we're trying to achieve with this infrastructure fund, and any dollars that we also potentially get from ARPA, so that we're all kind of going in the same direction. But their role, honestly, is just mostly in the advocacy piece of trying to get local leadership to put money from ARPA into digital inclusion, trying to get private sector to understand and know what is happening so that they can be involved and support. Obviously, at the state level as well, we just have a newly formed state broadband office, so we're trying to influence with our data set and our information to ensure that we are also kind of pushing them a little further along with aspirational goals and not just settle for the minimums. But yeah, so we're kind of trying to figure out how we're all going to work together. If the city takes on money, obviously we're going to be responsible for overseeing, coordinating, and implementing it. But there's going to be other entities, universities, schools, other community-based organizations that are going to be able to go for this money. And we just want to make sure that we're sharing data, that we're all kind of going towards the ultimate goal and collaborating as much as possible. So that is kind of what we're trying to achieve here in San Antonio, but it's definitely a work in progress.
Super, thank you. Carrie, can you talk a bit about who now takes money and who can't take money, and then who is doing work in the collaborations across different coalition partners?
Well, as you can tell from both Jordan and Candelaria's answers, this is not easy. It's a big, hairy monster we have to wrestle to the ground in some way, and it's complicated. And just understanding what digital inclusion is itself is complicated, right? I mean, it's about broadband, it's about who has access, it's about who actually has access, meaning they can get a plan, but they can't afford a plan, versus somebody who doesn't have a plan option at all because there is no infrastructure there. And then who provides services and what do those services look like? So, and then I think it complicates everything so much when we have this wonderful, incredible opportunity of funding, state, local, but mainly the federal funding that's going to come down a chain that we're not exactly clear how it's going to flow or who's going to get it. So, I mean, there are so many moving parts. And so I think, one of the things that I know that NDIA and other organizations are promoting is get a coalition together. And I think that's so smart because you want to have a group of people who are like-minded and thinking the same things, or at least all on the same page about what are we doing and who's doing what where. But that's also can be really daunting for anybody who's out there. It's like, how in the heck do I start a coalition now? And who do I need to talk to? And who's going to be responsible for this? And so, I mean, I would just, caution or say, first of all, that if you are going to plan a coalition, that you really, really do need to have clarity upfront about those things, like who is running it and what are the resources that are, I think the resources for whoever's going to be responsible for running a coalition need to be really clear, because it takes time. And, everybody has a real job, and many of these coalitions are put together as volunteer. We care about this work, right? We want to see it done well. But it also means somebody has to put meeting invites together. Somebody has to set the agenda. So who's it going to be? And I think as we know, with this influx of so much funding possible, there's now other people who are involved. The Chamber of Commerce is now involved. Everybody sees this as an important area. So I guess our coalition in Kansas City and others, we were not a formal 501c3. We don't have any real super formal structure. And so I think that was a little bit of a challenge when all of this happened, because people knew about our coalition and they knew the work that we did, but then they were saying, okay, well, we want to give you money. We want to infuse a bunch of money into this problem immediately. But we didn't have an ability or a way to do that, which I think is okay. But going forward, I still think the coalition needs to be a group of people who are meeting. And as Candelaria said, going in the same direction, thinking about things in the same way. But I feel strongly that if you don't have, and I think Jordan can tell us more, but in Franklin County, if you don't have a structure, you're not a 501c3, I do think that there needs to be an advisory group of people who are neutral, who don't have a vested interest in any way about the funding. So even if you're a library, you have some vested interest, not as much, but if any number of nonprofits are going to want or need the money. So I think that there needs to be some real oversight and transparency about what projects are selected and how are they selected, and how can we make sure that the people, whether it's a small neighborhood association, in a community that hasn't had the support in the past, they are just as critical as a library or as a university. They may be able to reach a group of people that we can't just by their location. So I just think it's so important that there has to be opportunities for everybody, but there has to be real oversight and an advisory capacity by people who don't have, a stake in the funding, but can be a resource to help you maneuver the funding piece itself.
We are in a really unique point in time, right? Where, wait, there's money?
Lots of money.
Sometimes we have to what? And I've talked to folks in other fields and they're like, how unusual you are, the situation you're in right now, right? I'm like, yeah, I get it. And it's temporary. And I get that it's temporary, that there's funding now through ARPA and other stimulus funds, and there's more money coming from the Infrastructure Act, but that's not permanent. And so a lot of what you all are doing in your coalitions, that building those connections and building that advocacy, it's what's going to help push for the continued funding, more funding later. And Carrie's question of how that money gets spent right now, that's a big issue. And it's going to cause probably knockout fights in some communities, right? Like folks are going to have different ideas on how the money should be spent. Some of the research that the Franklin County folks are doing has really knocked my socks off. So Jordan, would you mind sharing a bit of that, please?
Sure. And I would like to just acknowledge Candelaria and San Antonio for their planning work, because it really inspired us for a different a parallel planning process that we're going through that hopefully creates that discipline and neutral structure to be able to make priorities for funding and recommendations of what is most needed. But the way that we're going to do that is really through the resident voice. And so we've been doing a lot of work directly with residents over the past year in an approach called human-centered design with the Community Foundation and through Smart Columbus, where we've been going deep in interviews and co-design sessions and focus groups to spend hours of time really understanding what their lived experience is and how, in their perspective, what's needed, and not just like what's needed in terms of I need a better device, but in terms of what's needed in terms of how we connect with residents, or how do residents want to connect with each other in this space? Who's the trusted advisors that they trust to tell them what is an affordable, accessible broadband option for them, right? Are we using the right language when we're talking about internet or Wi-Fi or wireless or internet? I mean, it's such a critical, essential component of everyone's life. And to walk into this naively thinking that there's a population of people that just don't know how to get online is just completely false in the modern world. And so this population that we hope to serve from seniors to housing insecure, new Americans, underrepresented populations, all have really critical relationships with technology that both bring frustrations and emotion, safety, connection, well-being, and opportunity to their lives. And we got to get more in touch with how and why we're solving these problems, because I think what's most important to the residents should be most important in our funding priorities. And that is the only way we can put the mirror to ourselves to say, is this really the most important thing? Are we going to spend $1 million on something that maybe only 50 residents think is valuable, right? Like, how do we really check ourselves on that? So we're trying to bring the resident voice as front and forward into our planning process as possible, so that we can also, and this has happened twice now, where we've laid it all out in a roadmap against one user need, and we realize, wow, we're not even solving this problem. Like, this isn't even being addressed. Like, we thought it was this, right? And I think that's just a really, really powerful exercise than just a typical kind of framework.
Super. Thank you, Jordan. With all of this money coming, sometimes those who want to be helpful are then like, oh, the feds have it covered, and walk away, right? But the feds don't have it covered yet. And so there is still a need for not only funding from outside sources, non-federal, but just partnership and support. What are some of the things you need, that your coalition needs, that your own institution needs, that the partnerships that you have, that you're working with? What are the things you need?
I do think, as I mentioned, I think Jordan and Candelaria have already expressed like the importance, and they've done it, they've had the discipline and they've created more structure within their coalitions. And so I think making sure, right now, I think there needs to be, whether it's part of the funding from the federal government or within communities, funders, or where the support's going to come from, is just sustained support right now for this effort to collaborate, this effort to coalesce, this effort to decide, how can we make a real mark? How can we make the most of this incredible opportunity that we have? How can we, gather? I think there needs to be a lot of involvement, corporate America, cities, states, schools, nonprofits, residents, as Jordan said, but there has to be support for this effort of gathering right now. This prep work is so important right now that I just think that would be my ask is, we need all hands on deck. And that means, funding for positions, even if it's like consulting positions who we can come in and do real work that help support what we're trying to say. If it's studies or, focus groups or surveys or gatherings, whatever it's going to be, that I feel like that's what we need is some of this just like basic, almost community organizing in a way, if you will, but in a way that is equitable and bringing as many people to the table as possible.
I forget the exact amount, but Charlotte has gathered 60 million. And it's a little bit of ARPA money, but it's also corporate money. And it's about putting together plans. It's about coordination. It's about the services themselves. It is a new entity that they are creating there. But I think it goes to Carrie's point about the sustainability. I think it was in the NTIA's request for comments where they ask about this question. And part of me gets really like, okay, look, if we require sustainability, those smaller organizations, they just won't, because they don't have a sustainable plan. They're like trying to get by day to day. So we have to be realistic about that whole, it needs to be sustainable. Like we want it to be sustainable, but somebody's got to step up to make it sustainable. Because that small mom and pop organization that's teaching digital literacy, they don't have a sustainability plan. They're barely getting by day to day, but we want them providing those services.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just say that, and aspirational too, right? Because I think NTIA and even the broadband offices, they are looking for big projects. They want to make an impact here. And so maybe that's the other thing is I'm just challenging all of us to don't think small, think big, like what is really going to make the biggest impact and how can we do that? And I think that's going to help the broadband offices, get excited about supporting whatever big project your community is going to do, because then they can say, okay, this is fantastic. And then they can go back to NTIA and say, look at this, look what we have here and look at the impact we're going to make. And that's why we need X amount of dollars and you'll get more. I think that's a strategy that I believe in.
And I feel like maybe San Antonio is a little bit further ahead of some communities, and I would love your perspective on this, but I really do think there's a capacity shift going on locally around, a lot has been burdened on top of technology offices in cities or at schools or at libraries, and people have had, general assumptions that this role is in my job description. But there's a lot of conversation, at least in our community, going on around what is our capacity building strategy around this work, because there is money coming in, but it can't just be added on to the plate of people whose jobs that already exist, right? And I think that is a big kind of shift in terms of what does this team, what are the skill sets that are needed? What decisions are these people like responsible for? And how do they show up in these coalitions now when they have day-to-day authority of this? This isn't, there's a whole tribe of people now who are like, waking up and doing this work. We used to say, we need someone waking up and doing this work every day. And now we're like, well, there are people in 5 organizations now waking up and doing this work. So I think that's going to continue to grow. And I think that's a new dimension of the entire ecosystem, but we're feeling it on the ground is you have a lot of people waking up and doing this work now. It's not just volunteer. And how does that change the dynamic? How does that change the organizing structure?
How do we make sure those positions stay doing this work and have the funding to continue doing this work? And somebody else isn't like, oh, let's just take half of that job and they can come do this other thing. Candelaria, can you tell us about the position title that you have right now? What can you share about how that came to be and what you think about the sustainability of that position?
Yeah, definitely. So again, kind of tied back to the momentum and the work and all of the advocacy that occurred around digital inclusion and digital equity in San Antonio during our last budget process. We're really talking about that. We really don't have a person doing this at the city. It was part of Smart Cities. And I think to that effect, it helped. And it makes sense, right? How are you going to be a smart city if you have so many of your community members that are disconnected and strongly affected by any tiny minor thing, especially the pandemic not being minor? It literally caused people to die. So for us, It was just reiterating the importance of having a stronger effort around this and a stronger capacity, that it wasn't just you do smart cities and digital inclusion. So we did get that momentum, and our city leadership approved a position of digital inclusion administrator for the city of San Antonio. I think we're still kind of building on if we're going to add additional resources to that position to kind of help, because it's still a lot. You guys mentioned just so many pieces. So I'm going to be responsible for coordinating efforts internally with city departments, like our Department of Human Services, our Neighborhood and Housing Services Department, our Parks and Rec, our libraries that already do a lot of digital inclusion work. But again, and ensuring that we're leveraging resources as much as possible. It's also connecting with our community-based organizations and pulling in our efforts so that we can, again, amplify what we're trying to do and get it to our community members in the most easiest way possible. So it's definitely a first step. And so we're just kind of continuing to advocate for additional resources so that we can be prepared not only today, but tomorrow. And it is a permanent position. So there's definitely a sustainability factor of the digital inclusion administrator. So we'll see how it evolves as we go through this process.
That is super exciting, can I say, right? That it's a permanent position. Yes. Okay, we only have a couple minutes left. So big question for all of you. For the communities that are struggling to figure out how to get something going, whether it be a coalition or improved coordination amongst a few organizations, what is advice that you would give to to a community? Think of a community that's newer into this space and figuring out what it is, early steps that they can take. Who would like to go first? Jordan has wisdom. Excellent.
I would say two things: understand your data, get aligned on the case for change that motivates your community. And then I would also say start a really broad net of a landscape and assessment and bring in as many unique and different contributors to the solution as possible. I think the more at the beginning sets you up for success long-term.
That's perfect. Thank you. Candelaria.
I would add to that, collaboration is definitely important. Bring in your trusted community-based organizations. They probably have the pulse of the community down a lot better than you do. And just to amplify what Jordan said, make it a regional approach, especially if you're a smaller city. Even us as San Antonio, we're working with Austin, Houston, Dallas, Harris County, Travis County, Bexar County. So whenever you can kind of get together and brainstorm and workshop and, share frustrations and coordinate on aspirational goals, because at the end of the day, we all want to make sure that we're future-proofing our infrastructure as much as possible and being strategic with these dollars. And again, we're all going to have similar pain points, so why not work together on them?
Perfect. Thank you, Candelaria. Carrie.
I agree with both those great answers, but I would also just throw in, I think you should include, make sure that you include in your process people from the city, people from the county, people from the library system. These are institutions that are going to be there regardless. Many of them are, if they're not doing this work actively, they should be. If your city or county isn't involved, they should be involved. And so I think there's always going to be a community grassroots effort and concern and care from neighborhood groups or nonprofits. But I think you need some of those stronger institutions that are always going to be there that can help be a trusted gathering place like a library. And then we just are going to have city, county, state support, because that's the way the funding is going to flow. And so I just think those have to be strong, critical relationships. And if you don't have them on board, you have to, as Jordan said, get the data and show them why this is such an important investment. It's about jobs, it's about quality of life, it's about the growth of your community. So you have to get them involved, right up front.
Perfect. Thank you. Big thank you to my 3 rockstar panelists, and thank you to HTTP for having us for this conversation. If folks want more information about digital equity and how all this is happening, NDIA has a robust community that these 3 amazing rock stars are part of, and we welcome you into that community. There's more info at digitalinclusion.org.
A citizen looks out for everyone. Make sure they're included. We're out to give 10 million youth the resources they need to thrive, with digital access and technical skills, so they don't feel so distant from learning, whether they're here or here. Access to a promising future. That's our promise moving forward. Citizen Verizon, our plan for economic, environmental, and social advancement.
Want to know a really cool and nerdy fact about email that you can totally share at dinner parties? Oh, and this dinner party thing is a series, so you're going to want to hit follow. When email first came on the scene a few decades ago, lawmakers had to decide, was this electronic messaging more similar to a postcard or a letter? And this decision had massive implications for privacy. If email was considered to be more like a postcard, it would have no reasonable expectation of privacy of the information, aka snooping and surveillance is totally fair game. But a letter has the reasonable expectation of being private, and it's protected from unauthorized opening or snooping. The courts ended up considering email to be more similar to a letter. And thank goodness, emails are given heightened protection from snooping under pre-existing laws.